Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Close your eyes for a moment and picture Dracula. What do you see? A shadowy castle perched on a mountain peak. A tall, elegant figure in a black cape with pale skin and piercing eyes. You hear the accent, the promise of immortality whispered in the dark. This is the image that has haunted our nightmares for over a century. It is the king of all monsters. But what if the world's most famous monster was in fact a hero, a national savior, a man so revered by his people that they considered him a champion of God? The story of how that man, a prince and a crusader, had his name stolen and his legacy twisted into the shape of a demon is more shocking, more brutal, and more unbelievable than any fiction. This isn't a story about vampires. This is a story about the power of words to kill a man a second time and create a monster that would live forever. We are going to unmask the real Dracula. The story begins not in the gloom of a Transylvanian crypt, but in the heart of a holy war. The 15th century, Europe is not the collection of stable nations we know today. It is a fractured chessboard of kingdoms, duchies, and principalities. Fresh from conquering the jewel of Christendom, Constantinople, the Sultan's armies are a crimson tide, surging north, washing over the Balkans. They are relentless, seemingly invincible, and standing in their path, a tiny, defiant Christian Orthodox principality, a buffer state caught between the hammer of the Ottoman Crescent and the anvil of Catholic Hungary. This land was called Wallachia. Modern-day Romania. To be born a prince in Wallachia was not to be born to a life of luxury. It was to be born with a target on your back. It was a land of constant betrayal, of shifting allegiances where boyars, the wealthy nobles, would sell their prince to the highest bidder, be it Hungarian or Turk, for a few more acres of land or a title. In this viper's nest, in the year 1431, he named the boy Vlad III that same year. The father, Vlad II, travelled to Nuremberg to be inducted into a prestigious, secret society of monarchs and nobles. It was called the Order of the Dragon, founded by the Holy Roman Emperor. Its sole purpose was to defend the cross and crush the forces of the Ottoman Empire upon his induction. Vlad II was given a new title, Dracula. He was a dragon of God sworn to protect Christendom. And his son, Vlad III, was therefore known as Dr. Faculia. Son of the Dragon, a name of honor. A name of honor, a name of holy purpose. But a dragon is a creature of fire and wrath, and the son of the dragon would learn all about fire and wrath in the cruelest classroom. To secure a fragile peace, his father, Vlad Dracula, was forced to make an impossible choice. He had to send his two young sons, Vlad and his younger brother Radu, to the Ottoman court as political hostages. They were collateral. A guarantee of their father's loyalty, Vlad was just a boy, barely a teenager, when he was handed over to Sultan Murad II. He wasn't thrown in a dungeon. The reality was far more insidious. He and Radu were raised in the Sultan's court, educated alongside the Sultan's own son, the future Mehmed the Conqueror. They learned Turkish, studied the Quran, and were taught the art of war by the very empire they were born to fight. For his younger brother, Radu the Handsome, it was a golden cage. He adapted, charmed the Sultan, and eventually converted to Islam, becoming a close friend. But for Vlad, it was a crucible of pure hatred. He saw the inner workings of the empire. He saw its strengths, its discipline, its ruthlessness, and he saw its weaknesses. He watched, he learned, and he burned with a cold, silent fury. Every day was a lesson in power. He learned that mercy was a weakness the powerful could not afford. He learned that fear, and most importantly, he learned the Ottomans' favorite method of execution, their ultimate expression of power over a conquered enemy: impalement. He saw it with his own eyes. The slow, agonizing death, the public spectacle designed to terrorize any who would dare to defy the Sultan. He never forgot it. The years as a hostage forged him into a weapon. The rage simmered. His father, Vlad Dracula, had been betrayed. The boyars, the treacherous nobles of his own land, had conspired with the Hungarian regent, John Hunyadi. They captured his father, tortured him, and buried him alive. His older brother, Mircea, the heir, suffered an even more horrific fate. He was blinded with red, hot iron stakes and then buried alive as well. At that, his grief curdled into a singular, all-consuming purpose. Vengeance, vengeance against the Ottomans who held him captive, vengeance against the Hungarians who orchestrated the coup. And most of all, a terrible biblical vengeance against the boyars who had murdered his family and sold out his country. He was no longer just the son of the dragon. He was a man with nothing left to lose, armed with the intimate knowledge the throne of Wallachia was his birthright, and he would reclaim it not with diplomacy or treaties, but with blood and fire. His first 2 reigns were brief, flashes in the pan. He'd seized the throne only to be forced out by the shifting political winds and the scheming of his rivals. But it was his 3rd and longest reign, beginning in 1456, that would etch his name into history. This time there would be no compromise, there would be order, an absolute iron-fisted order. His first target was the internal enemy, the boyars, the vipers who had killed his father and brother. He knew he couldn't trust them. He knew they would sell him out just as they had his father, so he decided to cut the head off the snake. He invited hundreds of them, all the leading noble families, to a grand Easter feast at his court in Taf. They came, dressed in their finest silks and jewels, expecting a celebration. They feasted and drank, perhaps laughing, thinking this young prince could be easily manipulated like his father before him. Vlad let them enjoy the meal. He let them feel safe. Then, when the feast was over, his soldiers burst into the hall. The doors were barred. Panic erupted. Vlad stood before them, his eyes like chips of ice. One by one the terrified boyars answered. Some had seen 7. The oldest had seen more than 20. Most of them had died not in battle, but by assassination, by betrayal. By their betrayal, Vlad looked at them, his voice low and steady. He told them the chaos ended now. The older boyars, the ones directly responsible for his family's murder, were seized and taken outside. There, stakes had been prepared, a gruesome public execution. But he wasn't finished. The younger, healthier boyars and their families were spared the stake. Instead, he marched them from the feast, still in their silks, on a brutal 50-mile journey through the mountains to the ruins of an old castle overlooking the Arge River. He handed them tools and told them they would not rest, they would not stop, until they had rebuilt. They worked until the fine clothes fell from their bodies in rags, until many dropped from exhaustion and died. But they built it. They built what would become known as Ponari Castle, Dracula's castle. The message was clear and absolute. The old ways were dead. There was a new power in Wallachia, and its name was Vlad Dracula. The story of what he did next has become so twisted over the centuries, but what we do know is that he waged a war not just on his enemies, but on corruption itself. He was a tyrant, yes, but to the common peasant, the farmer, the honest merchant, he was a savior. He was their harsh but just prince. Stories of his justice became local legends. It was said he placed a golden cup by a public fountain in the center of Tafagavite and declared that anyone could drink from it. But if it was stolen during his entire reign, the cup was never touched. He despised laziness and poverty that stemmed from it. He once invited all the poor and sick of his land to another great feast. He fed them, gave them wine, and then asked if they wished to be without a care in the world for the rest of their lives when they cheered yes. He had the hall boarded up and set on fire, burning them all alive. His twisted reasoning, he had rid them of their... He was utterly ruthless with foreign merchants who tried to cheat his people. 2 Italian merchants came to his court, one reporting his ducats had been stolen. Vlad told him to leave his remaining money in the treasury overnight. The next day, the merchant returned to find his money. With 1 extra ducat added, the terrified merchant confessed the extra coin to Vlad. Vlad praised his honesty, telling him, "Had you not confessed, I would have had you impaled alongside the thief." The thief was already on a stake outside. This was his rule. Absolute, terrifying, but for the first time in a generation, Wallachia had order. The roads were safe. The economy stabilized. The common man was protected. He was their hero. But his greatest test, the dragon, was about to face the full might of the Ottoman Empire. By 1462, Sultan Mehmed II had had enough of the defiant Wallachian prince. This wasn't just any sultan. This was Mehmed the Conqueror, the man who had broken the 1,000-year-old walls of Constantinople. He commanded the most powerful army on the planet. And this little gnat, Vlad Dracula, was not only refusing to pay tribute, he was actively attacking Ottoman territory, raiding their forts along the Danube, slaughtering their soldiers. It was an intolerable act of defiance. Mehmed gathered a colossal army. Estimates vary, but it was at least 3 times the size of anything Vlad could muster. Some sources say over 100,000 men, a legion of janissaries, cavalry, and cannon, all led by the Sultan himself. Their goal was simple: to crush Wallachia, depose Vlad, and install his younger, more pliable brother, Radu, on the throne. It should have been a walkover, a footnote in the history of Ottoman conquests. Vlad knew he couldn't face this army in an open battle. So he turned Wallachia itself into a weapon. As the massive Ottoman army marched north, they found nothing. The villages were empty, the wells were poisoned, the fields were burned. Vlad waged a brutal campaign of guerrilla warfare and scorched earth. His small, swift cavalry units would appear out of the forests at night, strike the Ottoman camps with lightning speed, create chaos, and he even disguised himself as a Turkish soldier and infiltrated the Sultan's own camp one night, attempting to assassinate Mehmed in his tent. The attempt failed, but the psychological impact was enormous. The invincible Ottoman army was bleeding. Their morale was sinking. They were marching through a poisoned, empty land, harassed by a phantom enemy. But they pushed on. Their target was Vlad's capital, Tfergovifite. They were prepared for a siege, for a final glorious battle, but when they arrived, there was no battle. There was only silence. A few miles outside the city walls, the vanguard of Mehmed's army stopped dead in their tracks. The soldiers stared in disbelief. The commanders couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. Spread out before them, on each stake was an impaled body, 20,000 of them. Turkish prisoners of war, captured raiders, and Bulgarian collaborators. Men, women, and children. They were arranged in concentric circles, the tallest stakes in the center for the highest-ranking officers. The air was thick with the stench of death and decay. Crows feasted on the corpses. It was a vision from hell. Even Mehmed the Conqueror, a man who had waded through seas of blood to take Constantinople, a man who had seen every horror of medieval warfare, was shaken to his core. The chronicles say he looked upon the scene and admitted, "I cannot win this land from a man who does such things." He had not been defeated by force of arms. He had been defeated by an act of pure, calculated terror. The mighty Ottoman army, undefeated and unstoppable, turned back. They abandoned the campaign and retreated from Wallachia. Vlad, the son of the dragon, had faced the greatest power on earth and had made it blink. He had saved his country. He had saved, for a time, that corner of Christendom. In his homeland, he was a legend, a savior. But news of this victory and the gruesome method, and it was in the telling of the tale that the man began to die and the monster began to be born. The story of how this brutal warrior became a creature of the night is even more shocking. And if you are finding this hidden history as fascinating as we do, make sure you are subscribed and hit that like button, because you won't want to miss what comes next. Vlad's victory should have cemented his place as a hero of Christendom. He wrote to the other leaders of Europe, including the Pope, boasting of his victory and begging for support for a full-scale crusade to drive the Ottomans out of Europe for good. He was celebrated for a moment, but in the treacherous world of 15th century politics, a powerful neighbor can be more dangerous than a distant enemy. To the west of Wallachia was the Kingdom of Hungary, ruled by Matthias Corvinus. Corvinus was the son of John Hunyadi, the man who had conspired to kill Vlad's father. There was no love lost between them. Corvinus had taken money from the Pope to fund a crusade against the Ottomans, a crusade he was supposed to lead alongside Vlad, but Corvinus never showed up. He kept the money and watched from the sidelines. Now, with Vlad's stunning victory, Corvinus had a problem. Vlad was too strong, too independent. He was a threat to Hungarian influence in the region. So Corvinus, the supposed Christian ally, did what the Sultan could not. He betrayed Vlad. He forged letters. letters that made it seem as though Vlad was secretly plotting with the Ottomans to attack Hungary. It was a lie, but it was a convenient one. Using this flimsy pretext, Corvinus's army ambushed Vlad, captured him, and dragged him back to... The savior of Wallachia was now a political prisoner, and it was during his long years of imprisonment, from roughly 1462 to 1474, that the second, more insidious attack on his legacy began. This war wasn't fought with swords and cannons. It was fought with ink and paper across the border from Hungary. In the German-speaking lands of Transylvania lived the Saxon merchant. These were powerful, wealthy communities that Vlad had clashed with during his reign. He had restricted their trading privileges, which had previously allowed them to dominate the Wallachian economy. And when they defied him, he had punished them with his trademark brutality, impaling many of them. These Saxons hated him with a passion, and now, with Vlad imprisoned and powerless, they saw their chance for revenge. For the first time in history, information or misinformation could be mass, produced and distributed across the continent with incredible speed. It was the birth of propaganda, and Vlad Dracula became its first major victim, German pamphlets, filled with lurid, sensationalist tales of the bloodthirsty Wallachian tyrant, began to appear in cities all across the Holy Roman. They were the tabloids of their day, complete with gruesome woodcut illustrations. They depicted Vlad as a demonic monster, a cannibal, a fiend who reveled in cruelty for its own sake. They took the truth of his harsh justice and his psychological warfare and twisted it, magnified it 100-fold. They told stories of him boiling his victims in giant cauldrons, of him nailing the turbans of Ottoman envoys to their heads because they refused to remove them in his presence. The most famous and enduring of these tales was that Vlad enjoyed dining amidst the groaning, dying bodies of his impaled victims, dipping his bread in their blood. This was the seed. The first time the name Dracula was explicitly linked with blood drinking. It wasn't supernatural. These pamphlets were bestsellers. They spread like wildfire from Germany to Italy to Russia. People were horrified and fascinated. Vlad was no longer the complex, brutal ruler of a faraway land. He was a European bogeyman, a fairy tale monster used to scare children. The smear campaign was a stunning success. It destroyed his reputation across Catholic Europe. It justified Matthias, and it began the slow, alchemical process of turning a man of flesh and blood into a creature of pure myth. After more than a decade in prison, Vlad was eventually released. He had to marry a member of the Hungarian royal family and convert to Catholicism. But he was free. In 1476, with Hungarian support, he returned to Wallachia one last time to reclaim his throne. The exact circumstances of his death are a mystery. Some say he was assassinated by treacherous boyars. Others say he was surrounded and cut down by the Turkish army. The Ottomans claim they cut off his head and sent it to Constantinople preserved in honey, as proof that the great enemy was finally dead. His body was supposedly buried at a monastery in Snegov, an island near Bucharest, but the son of the dragon had vanished. For the next 400 years, the historical Vlad Faiepe, which means Vlad the Impaler, was remembered in two completely different ways in his homeland of Romania. He remained a national hero, a folk hero, the fierce, just prince who drove out the Turks and brought order to a chaotic land. They never forgot the man. But in the West, thanks to the German pamphlets and Russian chronicles that copied them, his name remained synonymous with monstrous cruelty. He was a historical villain, a footnote in the bloody history of the Balkans. He was a monster, but a human one. He wasn't a creature of the night. He didn't have fangs. He didn't drink blood to survive. He was just a memory of a cruel tyrant. That all changed in the final years of the 19th century. In a dusty library in London, the world had changed. The Ottoman threat was a distant memory. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Science and reason were king, but beneath the surface of this modern rational world, there was a deep fascination with the past, with folklore, with the supernatural. The Gothic revival was in full, and in Dublin, Ireland, a theatre manager and part-time writer named Bram Stoker was looking for a new monster. Stoker was the business manager for the famous actor Henry Irving, but his passion was writing. He wanted to write the ultimate horror story. He had an idea for a villain, an undead aristocrat, he initially called Count Wampir. But the name was generic. He began researching Eastern European history and folklore to add a touch of authenticity. He spent years in the British Museum Library poring over old books and maps. He read about the history of Wallachia and Transylvania. He read about the superstitions of the Romanian people, their belief in strigocy, the restless spirits of the dead who could rise from their graves at night to torment the living. These were the Romanian vampires. And then, one day, he stumbled upon a book by a British consul named William Wilkinson, titled An Account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia. In a footnote, Wilkinson briefly mentioned a 15th-century Wallachian prince who fought against the Turks and was given the name Dracula. Wilkinson noted that in the Wallachian language, Dracula meant devil. Drac meant dragon, but in the modern Romanian that had evolved over 400 years, Dracula had also come to mean the devil. For Bram Stoker, this was a bolt of lightning. The name itself was perfect. It sounded dark, powerful, foreign Dracula. He dug deeper. He found the old German pamphlets with their gruesome tales of the Impaler Prince, the stories of his cruelty, his ruthlessness, his supposed habit of dining among the dead and dipping his bread in blood. It was a perfect storm of inspiration. Stoker, who never once set foot in Romania, made a brilliant creative leap. He took two completely separate things, the historical figure of Vlad the Impaler, using his name and his reputation for cruelty from the German propaganda, and the unrelated, he fused them together. He took the name and the backstory of a real man and grafted onto it the supernatural powers of a mythical creature. He elevated the brutish Strigor from a peasant ghoul into a cunning ancient nobleman. He gave him a castle in the mysterious Carpathian mountains. He gave him the power to command the night, to transform into a bat or a wolf, and he gave him an insatiable thirst for the blood of the historical Vlad III, the son of the dragon, the Impaler Prince, the defender of Wallachia, was dead. In his place stood Count Dracula, the vampire. The novel, Fig Dracula Fay, was published in 1897. It wasn't an immediate runaway bestseller. It sold respectably, but it was just one of many Gothic horror novels of its time. For decades it was overshadowed by works like Fay Frankenstein Fay or Asterisk Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde Fay. The final complete transformation of Dracula from a historical figure into a global icon wouldn't happen on the printed page. It would happen on the silver screen in 1922. A German silent film studio released an unauthorized adaptation of Stoker's novel. To avoid copyright issues, they changed the name. The film was called Phenosferatu. This film visually defined the vampire for the first time. Max Schreck's Count Orlok was a grotesque, rat-like creature of the plague, a true monster from the shadows. He was pure nightmare fuel, but he wasn't the Dracula that would conquer the world. The Dracula would arrive 9 years later in 1931. Universal Studios in Hollywood produced the first official English-language film version of Dracula Fee. And for the title role, they cast a Hungarian actor who barely spoke English, a man named Bela Lugosi. Lugosi had played the role on Broadway, and he brought a completely different energy to it. His Dracula was not a monster. He was a seducer. He was a foreign aristocrat, with a hypnotic gaze, a slow, deliberate accent, and an old-world charm that was both alluring and deeply unsettling. Dressed in a tuxedo and a flowing cape, Lugosi's performance became iconic. It was his voice, his mannerisms, that became the definitive Dracula. I am Dracula. I never drink wine. This was the birth of the modern vampire, the suave, sophisticated, sexual predator. And it had absolutely nothing to do with the 15th-century Wallachian prince who fought and died for his country. The historical man was now buried under a mountain of fiction. The connection was almost completely severed. Hollywood ran with it. Christopher Lee took over the role for Hammer horror films in the 50s and 60s, playing Dracula as a more aggressive, overtly sexual, and terrifyingly violent creature. Then came countless other interpretations: sympathetic Draculas, romantic Draculas, action, hero Draculas. The vampire myth became a blank canvas for exploring our fears about death, disease, sexuality, and the foreign other. The name Dracula became a brand, a multi-billion-dollar industry of films, books, costumes, and tourist attractions in Romania, a country the real Vlad fought to protect. And so the transformation was complete. A story that started with a prince fighting the legacy of Vlad the Impaler was the victim of a perfect storm. First, the political propaganda of his enemies, supercharged by the new technology of the printing press, turned a national hero into a European villain. Then, 400 years later, a horror writer cherry-picked his sinister sounding name and his reputation for cruelty, and merged him with local vampire folklore to create a literary masterpiece. And finally, Hollywood took that literary creation and turned him into a pop culture icon, an image so powerful it completely erased the real man from popular memory. So, who was the real Dracula? Was he a hero or a monster? The truth is, he was both. He was a man forged in a brutal, violent age, to his enemies and to the traitors in his own land. He was a merciless tyrant. But to his people, the common folk of Wallachia, he was Vlad III, their protector. He was the iron fist that brought justice and order, the dragon who stood against the overwhelming might of an empire and saved them from annihilation. He is still remembered that way in Romania, a controversial but ultimately heroic figure from their national past. The vampire Count Dracula is a fiction. The real tragedy is that the name of a man who dedicated his life to fighting for his people's freedom and his Christian faith is now synonymous with the ultimate demon of the night. His name was stolen, his story was twisted, and his legacy was betrayed by history itself. The pen, as it turns out, is not only mightier than the sword sometimes, it can create monsters more terrifying. And if you enjoyed it, please subscribe and give it a like to support us. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.